December 2008. Alex Dalmody, an investment analyst, was sitting at his desk when his phone rang. On the other end was an old friend, Robert. Robert is a bit worried and asks Alex for a favor. He mentioned a bank he'd put money into and asked Alex to take a quick look just to make sure everything's fine. Something about Robert's tone made Alex curious. He hung up the call and started typing the name into his computer. Stanford International Bank. Within 30 minutes, Alex's curiosity turned into suspicion. According to Stanford's own reports, the bank showed steady growth, delivering consistent high returns year after year, untouched by market crashes or worldwide recessions. A bank that didn't even issue loans, relying solely on investments, was somehow outperforming the market. He instantly knew there was more to this than meets the eye. Stanford International Bank wasn't just a financial institution. It was part of the Stanford Financial Group, a global powerhouse with over 50 branches worldwide and more than 25 offices in the U.S. But it wasn't the first time Stanford International Bank had faced questions about their unusually high returns. At least, not from the outside. Two employees, Charles Rawl and Mark Tidwell, weren't buying the story behind Stanford's unbelievable returns. As financial advisors with loyal clients, they were desperate for answers. But Stanford wasn't like other banks. Details about its investment portfolio were tightly guarded, and too much questioning was met with guilt trips, intimidation, even veiled threats. Fed up with this, they both resigned on the spot and reported their concerns to the SEC. But there was a problem. Neither of them knew the full story. The SEC sensed something was wrong, but without hard evidence, accusing a financial giant like Stanford would be professional suicide. But there was something off about Stanford's setup.
The organization was way too flat for a multi-billion-dollar company. You expect many layers of management.
There were no economic giants in the team. Stanford is like a family business, with close friends and family being the top executives of the company. Except for one outsider, Laura Pendergast-Holt, the chief investment officer. The SEC wanted answers, and Laura Holt was their way in. They issued a subpoena and brought her in for questioning, but what she revealed made things even stranger. Laura only knew about 10% of the investments, the first and second tiers. The crucial third tier, the one holding the real story, was kept hidden even from her. The investigation hit another dead end. But now the real question was, what on earth was in that missing 90%? (1985) British Overseas Territory of Montserrat. 35-year-old Allen Stanford just landed at the Blackburn Airport. Like many opportunists drawn to the island in the 1980s, he was here to launch an offshore bank. Stanford wasn't new to business, but he was new to banking. Right after getting a degree in finance, Allen started his first business. Backed by his father's money, he opened a luxurious fitness club in Waco, Texas, called Total Fitness. Even though he had a successful run for a couple years, mismanagement and untimely investments made Total Fitness a total disaster. Approximately a $13 million disaster. But Allen Stanford didn't give up. Teaming up with his father, he pivoted into Texas real estate, just as the market was crumbling after the oil bust. Their gamble paid off. Within years, they doubled their profits. This marked the beginning of his investments in the Caribbean. Wiser and more ambitious, Stanford moved carefully this time, bringing along his longtime friend and former university roommate, James Davis, a mid-level accountant, to help build his growing empire. And within months, they set up their offshore bank, Guardian International.
Ever since my grandfather founded our first business in 1932, we have been committed to providing an uncompromising level of personal service. And 7.5 decades later, we are still guided by that philosophy.
Allen Stanford's pitch was simple, but bold. He promised returns 2% higher than other conventional banks. In the hope of attracting potential investors, he advertised in local newspapers, especially in Latin America. The strategy paid off. Guardian International grew radically. Within just a couple of years, they acquired up to $14 million in assets. But this also didn't last very long. By the late 80s, Montserrat's banking industry had become increasingly shady. As a British overseas territory, Montserrat's financial practices threatened to stain the UK's global reputation. With more cases of money laundering, drug cartels, and unregulated banks, the UK government revoked over 100 shady banking licenses. This included Allen Stanford's Guardian International. So he was forced to leave Montserrat. But for Allen, this was not a big deal, as there was a new opportunity, just 20 miles across the sea. Antigua and Barbuda, early 1990s. Unlike Montserrat, Antigua is an independent nation run by the powerful Byrd family. And like most islands in the Caribbean, they were hungry for foreign investments. For Allen Stanford, it was the perfect match. He acquired a struggling local bank, rebranded it as Stanford International Bank, and moved his growing empire to the island nation. His main product was certificates of deposit, or CDs. These are long-term investments, but unlike standard banks, Stanford promised returns of up to 20% higher. Investors came running. Moreover, with fat salaries and flashy perks, Stanford attracted top financial advisors to the team who brought even more clients.
He would every quarter bring what he would call his top performers club together. And it was always some exotic location, big parties. And he would hand out the quarterly bonus checks in front of everybody with the amount up on a screen.
$93,448.
By the early 2000s, Stanford's firm claimed to be handling more than $3 billion in assets. And Allen Stanford was living like royalty. With huge investments flowing in, he built his own kingdom in Antigua. He owned multiple private jets, mega yachts, luxury villas, and 2 5-star restaurants on the island. He even bought the daily newspaper, the Antigua Sun. With over 1,000 employees working for him, he became the largest employer on the island. But his influence didn't stop there. Stanford worked hard to align himself with the Antiguan government. He poured money into schools, hospitals, and even built a massive cricket stadium. He started loaning millions to the Antiguan government, helping them pay salaries and pensions. By 2004, the government owed him $87 million.
And they treated him like a king. And since they couldn't make him king, they knighted him and made him an honorary knight.
For services to the community and the economic development of Antigua and Barbuda.
By 2008, Sir Allen Stanford stood at the peak of his financial empire, claiming to manage a staggering $6.6 billion in assets. And then came his boldest play. June 2008, Lord's Cricket Ground, London.
Stanford, an American billionaire who's already invested heavily in 2020 cricket in the West Indies, is now turning his attention to England.
The Texan billionaire made an audacious entrance to announce his audacious plan at the home of cricket.
Stanford landed in a helicopter and proposed an outrageous challenge. A winner-takes-all T20 cricket match. The England's national squad versus his Caribbean team, the Stanford Superstars. With an unprecedented $20 million on the line, the biggest prize ever offered for a single game of cricket in history, Sir Allen Stanford was at the top of his game. But all of this was happening in the middle of the worst financial crisis. While global markets were collapsing and major banks were falling apart, Stanford was still throwing money around like nothing could touch him. With recession at its peak and big banks like Lehman Brothers already on their knees, one question grew louder. How could Allen Stanford still be so confident when every other banker was bracing for disaster?
Fixture on Wall Street, Bernie Madoff, 70 years old, arrested by the FBI.
Wall Street's biggest swindler ever, now behind bars.
December 2008. The Bernie Madoff scandal exploded, and with it, shockwaves rippled across the entire country. The SEC and FBI began sweeping through the financial industry. Inside Stanford International, panic takes hold. In a Dallas law office, James M. Davis, Stanford's CFO and Allen's longtime right-hand man, paces nervously. The SEC is closing in fast. They've already grilled Laura Pendergast-Holt, and David knows he's next in line.
Did you cook the books? That's what I'm asking you. Did you cook the books? Yes or no? And then he came clean.
The truth finally cracked open. Stanford International wasn't a bank. It was a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. New investor money paid old obligations. Nearly 90% of the assets were never invested. It was issued as a loan to just one shareholder, which was Sir Allen Stanford himself. Over $1.6 billion vanished into yachts, jets, mansions, and Stanford's ego. But how does a scheme like this survive for over 2 decades? Because Allen Stanford wasn't just running a fraud. He built an empire of deception and hid behind his public image as a successful banker and philanthropist. His family business and legacy were all a big lie. His grandfather wasn't a business tycoon. He was a small-town barber in Mexia, Texas. Everything he represented was just an illusion. Inside the company, anyone who asked tough questions got silenced. The brokers and financial advisors who demanded proof were shut down with accusations of disloyalty. They were either fired, threatened, or guilt-tripped. And with generous paychecks flying around, most employees chose to look the other way. On the outside, the main allegations were centered around money laundering and drug cartel ties. But with millions in legal firepower, Allen Stanford crushed anyone who dared to challenge him. He didn't stop at lawsuits. Terrified of being exposed, Stanford hired private intelligence firms like Kroll Associates to spy on investigators and protect his image. He even brought in a former FBI chief as his head of security. Stanford knew that to keep his scam alive, he needed power and influence. In Antigua, he bribed regulators, most notably Leroy King, head of the island's Financial Services Commission. King withheld key information from the U.S. authorities, helping Stanford stay under the radar, and in return, he pocketed $520,963 in bribes. And in Washington, D.C., Stanford spent over $7 million on lobbying and campaign donations, buying access at the highest levels. Stanford believed he built a wall no one could break through, until February 2009. Federal agents issued a search warrant and raided Stanford Financial's offices across the U.S. The financial empire collapsed almost overnight. Allen Stanford never admitted his crimes. Maybe he believed his own lies. He was arrested in February 2009, and in 2012, after a long trial, the court sentenced him to 110 years in federal prison. The empire built on lies. Gone. Allen Stanford's conviction ended his empire, but for his victims, the nightmare was only beginning. As the dust settled, the world saw the staggering cost of his lies and the shocking failure of the system meant to protect them.
Sometimes asking me for help because they don't have food or they don't have money to pay for operations.
It's the second largest Ponzi scheme in American history. The Allen Stanford case exposed deep cracks within the U.S. regulatory system. Out of the $7 billion he stole, barely a cent was ever recovered for every dollar stolen. Over 28,000 victims were left with nothing, and many lost everything they had. Yes, Allen Stanford will die behind bars. But is that really justice?
People have killed themselves. They have died waiting for it. They've died in poverty. The repercussions of this are so devastating.
This wasn't the first time greed and arrogance toppled a financial giant. Watch how one rogue trader wrecked one of England's oldest banks next.